Hello gamers and welcome back. I'm Rob, of course, or Warshack if you want to call me by my in-game name, and we're going to be covering kind of the top 5 best aggro budget-based decks you can build right now. Keep in mind that all of these decks have no legendaries in them. There's no epics. These are solely focusing on the beginner slash intermediate slash free-to-play players. For those of you out there who are like, you know, I just started, what decks should I be aiming to build? I have no idea. You know, tier 1, tier 2 decks, they cost like 8,000 dust. There's no way I'm going to get there. These decks that I'm going to list off are, you know, tier 1 and tier 2 decks, but they've been toned down to the point where they may not play all of the most expensive cards, but I've tried to replace those with cards that are similar or also have abilities that really synergize as well with the deck. Also keep in mind that the deck's dust cost will go up as we move through the video, with the first deck I think starting off around 1,200 dust, and I think towards the end they get around 1,800. Not a big difference there, but still, if you're looking for the cheaper decks, those will always be introduced at the start of the video. Also keep note that after this aggro budget deck, I will be releasing the mid-range versions and the control versions of the budget-based decks after this, so I have to make sure I get on it and do my job, Rob. Alright, so our first deck is going to be the Token Druid, so I'm sure you guys have seen this on ladder, or at least a rendition of it. The key of this deck, or kind of like the goal of it, is very similar to another deck that we're going to be covering, which is also called the Zoo Warlock. But to focus in on this deck, it uses cards like the Enchanted Raven, Firefly, and Argent Squire to get on the board early. Those cards are pretty highly statted or very annoying for your opponent to get rid of, right? A 1 mana 2/2, pretty highly statted. Firefly is technically a 1 mana 2/4 if you count the card that it generates, and then the Argent Squire has Divine Shield. From there, you're going to be looking to follow up with like Mark of Your Shards if you can put it on a beast like your Enchanted Raven. If not, you can go with like the Runt, which will actually adapt if you have 2 or more minions on the board. Once you've been able to establish at least like a 2 or 3 creature board, you can go ahead and use cards like Mark of the Lotus or Power of the Wild to buff them up once they're buffed, in combination with cards like Savage Roar, Defender of Argus, Evolving Spores, and Soul of the Forest. It allows your field to become even more resilient, and you can kind of you can burst out your opponent with cards like Savage Roar, but some games you won't even need Savage Roar because the ability to put in like chip damage of whether it be 2 chip damage or 5 chip damage every turn from turn 2 on with all of your cheap, relatively decently statted minions. Most decks just can't deal with that kind of pressure early on unless they draw very, very well. So let's say if you go against a mage and they happen to get like an early volcanic potion. Yes, it's unfortunate, but it does happen. But most decks like Taunt Warrior, Rogue, even different Druid decks like Ramp Druid or Jade Druid, they don't really hit the ground running until like turns 5 or 6, right? So this deck aims to kind of prey on the decks that take longer to get into motion. With this deck, like right off the beat, takes off, minions every turn, buff them up, swing big with Defender of, or swing big with a good old Savage Roar, or buff them up with Evolving Spores. And Soul of the Forest is of course really annoying to deal with as well, because after they kill the board, then they have to deal with a bunch of 2/2s. So a very similar game plan to Zoo, a little bit different in regards to like having the Savage Roar in the deck and the Evolving Spores, but the whole point of, you know, placing minions on the board that are very decently statted and pretty resilient to early game is kind of key there. Our next deck that we're going to talk about is going to be the Pirate Warrior. Yes, I know it's not a very interesting deck and a deck that we haven't seen a lot of. It's a deck that you're going to encounter, I don't want to say all the time on ladder, but if you've played Hearthstone anytime recently and you've played ranked play at all, you will come in contact with this deck very, very soon if you haven't already. The key of this deck, it uses, I don't want to say relatively good statted cheap minions, because that's not really the key of this deck. It has very powerful mid-range minions such as the Frothing Berserker and the Bloodsail Cultist, in combinations with weapons such as your Arcanite Reaper and your Fiery War Axe, and your minions kind of synergize with your weapons in regards to either giving them an upgrade or giving them more attack. Also, along with that, you have a card called Frothing Berserker, which can actually just win you games on its own. If this card was a pirate, I'm not sure how crazy this deck would really be. So for God's sake, I am so glad that Frothing Berserker is not a pirate, but this game on its own will be able to win you games, and I'm pretty sure it's either I think it's just a rare. So it's really not that hard to get. Fits into a lot of warrior, whether you're playing tempo or pirates. But yeah, this is probably, if you're looking for the strongest of all of the budget decks, this is probably a good way to go. Again, maybe not the most fun to play in regards to, you know, activity on the board. Most of the time you're just swinging face unless you have a really nice trade available to you. Like, let's say if your 1/1 can kill their 5/1, that's probably a good trade to make. But besides that, this deck hits the ground running with cards like N'Zoth's First Mate into Raider, into like Cultist or Frothing Berserker. You play weapons on the way. Cards are even reduced based on your weapon's attack, like the Dread Corsair. You keep the weapons rolling with cards like Upgrade and Bloodsail Cultist, and you just keep going face, and it's just a force to be reckoned with. I would have to say, if you could say, Rob, you know, how does Pirate Warrior match up with decks that are now, you know, it was good before the standard rotation, but how does this deck fare after the standard rotation? I would have to say the deck is still a tier 1 deck for sure. And again, if you're looking for the strongest kind of aggressive base deck that you can build, this is a good place to kind of start with the Pirate Warrior. I know me telling people to play Pirate Warriors, a lot of people are going to hate me for it, but hey, if you're looking to get the ranks up, if you're looking to play a strong deck, that's the deck you need to turn to. And I'm not gonna, you know, and I'm not gonna lead you guys in the wrong direction in regards to the strongest decks, if those are the results you're looking for. This next deck is going to be a deck that really used to be an extremely powerful deck. The Face Hunter used to be, I would have to say, as powerful, maybe not as powerful as the Pirate Warrior, but back in the day, this deck was nerfed so many times, and it was a very strong deck if piloted by, like, there was a big difference in between like a bad Face Hunter player and a good Face Hunter player. Being able to maximize damage every single turn for, like, you know, 5 to 6 turns, and even the worst matchups can allow you to kind of squeeze out victories that you never thought you could. Hence how Firebat actually won a world championship with this, I don't want to say this particular deck, but with the Face Hunter in general. So this deck aims to, there's not really a lot of cheap resilient minions. There's cheap minions that are good, but the point of this deck isn't necessarily get board control, keep board control, and go face with a bunch of minions. You've got cards like Kill Command, Eaglehorn Bow, Unleash the Hounds, and Knife Juggler for really big bursts of damage. So in combination, like Knife Juggler, Unleash the Hounds is a great combo to not only clear board, but to deal a bunch of damage faced. The Hyena is also really powerful with the Unleash the Hounds. It has a very good start now with the Crackling Razor Maul Alley Cat combo. So there's a lot of potential there. And then just the ability to kind of have the Infested Wolf Death Rattle combo again with Knife Juggler is really powerful. So there's just this deck with the highest card being, you know, 4 mana. This deck again hits the ground running. Of course, it's an aggressive based deck, and it aims to kind of fill up the board quickly, but with your hero power, Kill Command, Eaglehorn Bow, the amount of chargers in this deck with like Animal Companion into like Huffer, you can actually be able to whip out a lot of damage with actually no creatures on the board. Without creatures on the board, unlike the Token Druid deck, which kind of requires you, unless you're like a swiping your opponent, that's only 4 damage bursts. Like this, you could go like Animal Companion into Huffer, Kill Command for 6 mana. You're whipping out 9 damage, right? So you really have a lot of burst potential in regards to not having a lot of creatures on the board with this particular Face Hunter build, which, you know, depending on the matchup, could be something that you're looking to do. Again, very powerful, yeah, no doubt. Definitely will kill in the lower ranks. You play Face Hunter at rank like, you know, 20 through 15, and you're going to be crushing people. Same thing with Pirate Warrior, but I think even more so Face Hunter will do. Let's actually take a look back here. So like if I had to say at the particular ranks, like ranks, I would say 25 through 20, you could play any of these decks and you'll be fine. From rank 20 to 15, I'd have to actually recommend this Face Hunter list, just because of the amount of damage that you can do. People will really underestimate Hunter right now. And then if you play Warrior, especially Pirate Warrior, a lot of people are teching in the Galaka Crawler, hopefully I said that correctly, into their decks. So even though Pirate Warrior may in fact be a stronger deck overall in regards to just the power level in comparison to this Hunter list, you'll actually still be able to keep a lot of people, catch them off guard, and they won't really know how much damage you can do until it's kind of too late. So you could actually catch a lot of people off guard with a Face Hunter list, which is what I always like to do with my decks. Keep people on their toes, never allow them to know your deck card for card, right? So the next deck is going to be a really interesting deck. I actually, when Mean Streets first came out, I ran a version of Tempo Rogue, and that Rogue deck piloted me to Legend within the first 5 days of the season. Super fun to play, so many different kind of combinations of cards you can use in each turn. So I said, you know what, why don't I kind of turn my Tempo Rogue into more of like an aggro rogue. slap on that budget tag on there, and this is what I came up with. The deck pilots very similarly to the decks like the Face Hunter in regards to the amount of burst, but it's like a mixture between Token Druid and Face Hunter, to be completely honest. It's a very interesting, I don't want to say a very hard deck to play, but there's a lot more things and a lot more kind of intricacies to each turn than I want to say the Hunter, the Warrior, and the Druid combined, because there's a lot of stuff you can do and a lot of synergies with like the Strangled Thorn Tiger, the Shadow Sensei, the Venom, and the Shadow Rager. And a lot of you could be like, Rob, you're crazy, Shadow Rager? Are you joking? I'm actually not. The Shadow Rager is a card, yes, the Shadow Rager is basically a 3 mana, deal 5 damage if your opponent doesn't have a taunt. It also combos really well with the Shadow Sensei, and it also combos well with stuff like Cold Blood, because the Argent Horse Rider is no longer a thing because it got rotated out. So we kind of want cards that the Cold Blood in combination with a high statted creature can make contact with your opponent's face, as this is a very aggressive base deck, and that's kind of exactly what the Shadow Rager Cold Blood combo does, and it does it very, very well, surprisingly. So as silly as this deck looks, you can be like, Rob, I've seen nothing like this deck ever. It's actually a really fun, really interesting, and it's a deck that's gonna not only, again, catch your opponents off guard, it's gonna be fun while playing it too. It's not gonna be as some would call as dull as maybe the Pirate Warrior. It may not be, again, as powerful, but catching your opponent off guard and your opponent not knowing what's in your deck is almost as important as the actual power level of your deck. So moving to the next one, this is going to be the Zoo Warlock, which we mentioned earlier. This deck has been around kind of since, I don't want to say the dawn of time, but it's been around since the very early stages of Hearthstone. The ideal of the deck and the foundation is, I want to say, on point with what it was, 2 or 3 years ago, and it's very, again, similar to the Druid class, where you slap down a bunch of resilient minions, but instead of kind of buffing those minions up, your minions, I want to say, on stat for stat basis with the Druid deck are just even more enhanced due to the fact that you've got cards like Knife Juggler, Forbidden Ritual, which together can swing games in a whole. You've got cards like Darkshire Councilman, with if left unchecked, this card's going to gain anywhere from like 2 to 3, even 4 attack per turn if left unchecked. You've got cards like the Devil Star Egg into the Ravenous Paradax, hopefully I'm saying that correctly, which can grant you a very, very huge creature with the Paradax, whether you're going for the attack, Divine Shield, +1/+1, health, whatever the case may be. This guy can win you games on its own, plus it's going to be able to summon the 5/5 from the egg. It's just, this deck has a bunch of synergies, very powerful, and definitely will not do you wrong on ladder, and it's a very consistent deck, due to the fact that, again, this deck kind of caps out at 5 mana. You're not going to really struggle at being able to have turn 1, 2, and 3 plays. Sometimes, though, games you will draw into like double Doomguard, double Defender of Argus, and there'll be nothing you can do. There's always going to be games like that due to the fact that this is a card game and luck will not always be on your side. But for the most part, this deck is very, very consistent in the fact that you're going to be playing a very strong minion or a very resilient minion every turn, with being able to have very powerful swing turns, like I mentioned with the Knife Juggler, Forbidden Ritual, even like, Doomguard and stuff like that. I mean, not only does this have burst, it has the ability to come back on board, and then also it has a lot of really powerful mid-range minions with again if they're left unchecked, you're able to kind of sweep out a really nice early game and an early victory there. So with that, those are all of our top 5 budget-based aggro decks. As we move along in the deck series, should I call it deck series? Budget series, the decks will get more and more expensive because, as we know, the aggro decks are a lot cheaper than the control decks, granted that you need a lot more late game cards, and as we know, late game cards are mostly more expensive. Keep in mind, though, there will be no legendaries, no epics. I will do my best to build the most powerful budget-based decks for you with the lowest dust count in mind, because I know, again, free-to-play players, beginner players, and intermediate players, you guys don't have those kinds of resources to be able to swing out a fully decked out tier 1 or tier 2 deck right off the start of playing Hearthstone. I fully understand that, and I will do my best to keep bringing you kind of the best budget decks that I can come up with for the particular meta and the cards that are available to us at this time. So with that, I want to thank you for watching the video, and if I've left anything out, or if you'd like to add anything to the video that I may have left out, feel free to leave that, and of course the comment section below, always enjoy reading that. And for those players who are looking for additional information, the comment section is always a great way to look at a great place to look as well. So as always, I'm Warshack, of course, and happy whatever the hell day it is.